by making films, and he really had a lot of energy, and I guess there's the other Stevie Wonder, not the one who was here tonight, but.
If you were around in the 1980s, his face was everywhere. A whirlwind of charm and perfect comedic timing, all packed into a 5'4" frame that somehow dominated both the big and small screens. He was Marty McFly, the time-traveling, guitar-shredding teenager who made us all believe in a plutonium-powered DeLorean. He was Alex P. Keaton, the Reagan-loving son who was way smarter than his ex-hippie parents, a character that totally defined a generation. Michael J. Fox wasn't just an actor, he was a phenomenon. His face was on lunchboxes, his posters on bedroom walls. He was the definition of youthful energy, the embodiment of a future that seemed bright and absolutely limitless. But behind the iconic roles and the flash of the cameras, a completely different story was unfolding. A secret battle that began long before anyone could have guessed. For more than 30 years, while he was making the world laugh, he was in a fight for his life, a fight against an opponent he could neither see nor outrun. It started with a twitch, a tiny, almost unnoticeable tremor in his left pinky finger. The year was 1991, and at just 29 years old, Michael J. Fox was at the absolute peak of his career. He was a global superstar, a newlywed, and a new father. The twitch seemed like nothing, maybe a pinched nerve or just pure exhaustion. But it didn't go away. It grew. It was the first quiet whisper of a devastating diagnosis that would change everything. Today, that whisper has become a roar, a daily battle with Parkinson's disease. But a recent, monumental scientific breakthrough, one his own foundation championed, could change the entire game. This is the untold story of his private 30-year war and the incredible discovery that's now giving him, and millions of others, a powerful new reason to hope. To really get why the shock of Michael J. Fox's diagnosis was so seismic, you have to go back in time, not in a DeLorean, but to the cultural landscape of the 1980s. It was an era of big hair, bold fashion, and even bigger movies, and right at the center of it all was a young actor from Canada who seemed to have caught lightning in a bottle. Before he was a household name, Michael Andrew Fox was just a determined kid who talked his dad into letting him move to LA to chase his acting dream. He added the J to his name as a nod to character actor Michael J. Pollard and set out to conquer Hollywood with nothing but raw talent and an insane work ethic. For a while, it was a real struggle. He was literally a starving actor, at one point selling his sectional sofa piece by piece just to buy food. He was right on the verge of quitting and heading back to Canada when the call came. It was for a new sitcom called Family Ties. The show's creator, Gary David Goldberg, really wanted someone taller to play the part of the sharp, conservative son, Alex P. Keaton. But Fox's audition completely changed his mind. He delivered the lines with this unique mix of intellectual arrogance and boyish charm that was impossible to resist. The network execs were still skeptical, with one famously saying, "This is not the kind of face you're ever going to see on a lunchbox." It would go down as one of the most hilariously wrong predictions in TV history. Family Ties hit the air in 1982 and instantly became a cultural phenomenon. Fox's portrayal of Alex P. Keaton was a comedic masterclass. He was a walking contradiction, a kid who worshipped Richard Nixon and Wall Street but lived under the roof of his free-spirited former hippie parents. The show was supposed to be about the parents and the culture clash between the 60s and 80s, but Fox just stole the show. His character got so popular that the whole series started to revolve around him. He won 3 straight Emmy Awards for the role, and those lunchboxes the executives scoffed at, they became a reality. While he was the king of TV, Hollywood came knocking. The call was for a movie called Back to the Future. The role of Marty McFly, a cool teenager who zips back to the 1950s and has to make sure his parents fall in love, seemed written for him. There was just one tiny problem. His Family Ties' schedule was a nightmare and left no time for a movie. The part initially went to another actor, Eric Stoltz. But weeks into filming, the filmmakers realized something was missing. Stoltz was a good actor, but he didn't have that specific, kinetic, comedic spark the movie needed. They had to have Michael J. Fox. So they made an unprecedented and absolutely exhausting deal. Fox would rehearse and tape Family Ties all day, from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Then a van would whisk him over to the Back to the Future set, where he'd film all night, often until sunrise. He'd get driven home for a couple of hours of sleep and then start the whole cycle over again. For months, he ran on pure adrenaline and ambition. He really was that energetic, unstoppable kid everyone saw on screen. When Back to the Future came out in the summer of 1985, it wasn't just a hit. It was a worldwide sensation. The film became the highest-grossing movie of the year, cementing Fox's status as a genuine movie star. He was simultaneously the star of the #1 movie and one of the top-rated shows in America. He was everywhere. People loved him because he felt like one of them, this everyman who also happened to be extraordinarily talented. He was living a life that was bigger than anyone, including him, could have ever dreamed. The world was at his feet. 1991 should have been just another great year for Michael J. Fox. He had survived child stardom and become a respected adult actor. He'd starred in 2 blockbuster Back to the Future sequels and was now headlining a new comedy, Doc Hollywood. He was married to the love of his life, actress Tracy Pollan, whom he'd met on the set of Family Ties. They had a young son, Sam, and life looked perfect. He wasn't the boy on the lunchbox anymore. He was a man who had built an incredible life. But fate was about to deal him a card no one ever saw coming. He was on location in Florida, filming Doc Hollywood, when he first felt it. A small, involuntary twitch in his left pinky. At first, he brushed it off. Actors are always pushing their bodies in weird ways, so he figured he'd just bumped it or strained something. But the twitch didn't go away. It wasn't painful, but it was there. A tiny, rhythmic rebellion he couldn't control. After the movie wrapped, he went to see a neurologist. He walked into the appointment curious, expecting a simple explanation. He walked out in a state of utter shock. After a round of tests, the doctor delivered the verdict with a chilling finality. "You have Parkinson's disease," he said. "The good news is, you have about 10 years of work left." The words just hung there. Parkinson's disease. To the 29-year-old superstar, that was an old person's disease. It was something that caused stooped shoulders and shuffling feet, not something that happened to a vibrant actor at the peak of his powers. It was impossible. A mistake. A grotesque misdiagnosis. He told the doctor, "You're wrong. You don't know who you're talking to." He was Michael J. Fox, the guy who worked 2 full-time jobs at once. This couldn't be happening to him. The eye diagnosis was a brutal collision with a reality he never could have imagined. Parkinson's is a progressive neurodegenerative disorder caused by the death of dopamine-producing cells in the brain. Dopamine is essential for controlling movement, mood, and more. As those cells die, the brain's commands get garbled, leading to tremors, stiffness, and slowness. But it's so much more than a movement disorder. It hits your mood, your sleep, your thinking, and it's relentless. There is no cure. The doctor's casual line about having 10 years of work left was maybe the cruelest blow. It wasn't a diagnosis. It was a countdown. A stopwatch had just been started on his career and his life as he knew it. The future, once an endless blue sky, was now covered in a thick, menacing fog. The golden boy of Hollywood now had a secret, a crack in his armor that he and Tracy decided to hide from the world. The 7 years that followed were a masterclass in deception, a role tougher than any he'd ever played. Publicly, Michael J. Fox kept working, smiling, and charming everyone. Privately, he was sinking into a world of fear, denial, and a desperate fight to keep control. He was living a double life, one under the bright lights of Hollywood, the other in the long, dark shadow of his disease. His first instinct was to run, to work even harder, as if he could outrun the illness taking over his body. He dove into movies, For Love or Money, Life with Mikey, The American President. Work was his escape, a way to prove to himself that he was still the same guy. But it was also a source of constant nagging anxiety. Every day on set became an exercise in hiding. The tremor, which started in his pinky, began to creep up his left hand and arm. He became a strategist of his own body, always thinking about how to hide the shaking. If he was walking, he'd hold a prop in his left hand. If he was sitting, he'd stuff his hand in his pocket. The non-stop motion that had always been part of his energetic acting style now served a new purpose. It was camouflage. He was hiding in plain sight. The physical toll was huge, but the psychological weight was even heavier. The secret was eating him up inside. He was terrified of being found out, terrified of the world's pity, terrified of his career vanishing overnight. That fear led him down a dark road. He started drinking heavily, not for fun, but to self-medicate, to numb the anxiety and the physical symptoms. It was a coping mechanism that quickly spun out of control. His wife, Tracy, saw the worst of his despair. He'd come home from a long day of pretending, and the mask would crumble. He was angry, scared. His anchor. In his documentary, Still, he tells a story about Tracy finding him passed out on the floor, a beer can spilled next to him. The next morning, she didn't yell. She just looked at him and asked, "Is this what you want?" Her quiet question was a gut punch. It was the moment he knew he had to stop drinking, not just for himself, but for his family. With Tracy's support, he started going to AA and got sober. Quitting drinking was the first step toward acceptance, but the disease kept marching on. The medication he was on, levodopa, was both a miracle and a curse. The drug replaces the brain's lost dopamine, allowing him to function normally for a while. But he had to plan his entire day around his pill schedule. He'd take a pill and know he had a specific window of time before the tremors and stiffness came roaring back. Sometimes the meds worked too well, causing dyskinesia, wild, uncontrollable movements that were even harder to hide than the Parkinson's tremors. In 1996, he took a huge risk and accepted the lead role in a new sitcom, Spin City. The frantic schedule of a TV show was a high-wire act for someone trying to hide a movement disorder. But he did it, partly to be closer to his family in New York, and partly to defy the disease. For the first few seasons, the secret held. The cast and crew just thought he was a consummate pro who fidgeted a lot. They had no idea his energy was a carefully built illusion. But by 1998, the secret was just too heavy. The effort of hiding was becoming harder than the disease itself. He realized the wall he'd built to protect himself had become a prison. He knew he had to tell the world. After 7 years of running, it was time to turn and face it. In 1998, Michael J. Fox ended his 7 years of silence with a stunningly candid interview in People magazine. He told the world, "I have Parkinson's disease." The news sent shockwaves everywhere. Fans were floored. The idea that this icon of youthful energy was fighting a debilitating disease was almost impossible to comprehend. But the reaction wasn't pity, which he'd feared for so long. It was overwhelming admiration and support. In that moment of vulnerability, Michael J. Fox transformed from a beloved actor into an inspiration. Going public wasn't the end, it was a new beginning. He thought telling his story was for his own sake, to free himself. But he quickly saw the power his voice could have. He was flooded with letters from other Parkinson's patients and their families, all fighting their own quiet battles. He heard their frustration with the slow pace of research and their desperate hope for a cure. He said, "We didn't have money, we didn't have a voice, and I thought, well, I could step in for these people and raise some hell." And raise hell he did. In 1999, he testified before a Senate subcommittee, making a passionate plea for more federal funding for Parkinson's research. In a room full of stone-faced politicians, Fox was raw and powerful. He deliberately didn't take his medication before the hearing, so the full effects of his symptoms were on display. His body shook uncontrollably as he spoke, a visceral, undeniable picture of the disease's reality. His testimony was a landmark moment for patient advocacy and helped nearly double the NIH budget for Parkinson's research. But that was just the start. In 2000, he did something even bigger. He retired from full-time acting, leaving Spin City to dedicate his life to fighting Parkinson's. He launched the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research, MJFF, with one audacious goal: to find a cure. This wasn't going to be some passive charity. It was designed to be aggressive, nimble, and laser-focused on results. Fox and his team acted like venture capitalists, hunting down the most promising research and funding it directly, slicing through the red tape that often slows science down. The Foundation's impact has been revolutionary. Since it began, the MJFF has become the largest nonprofit funder of Parkinson's research in the world, raising and investing over $2 billion in the search for a cure. It has backed hundreds of projects across the globe, creating a network of scientists, doctors, and patients all aimed at the same goal. One of its biggest bets was the Parkinson's Progression Markers Initiative, PPMI, launched in 2010. The PPMI is a massive long-term study to find biomarkers of the disease, biological signs, like cholesterol for heart disease, that can track an illness. For decades, a Parkinson's diagnosis was just a doctor's best guess based on symptoms, which often appear long after the damage has started. Finding a biomarker was the holy grail, the key to unlocking early diagnosis and better treatments. The Foundation poured hundreds of millions of dollars into this project, collecting data from thousands of volunteers for over a decade. It was a monumental gamble on collaborative science, a gamble that was about to pay off in the biggest way imaginable. For decades, fighting Parkinson's was like fighting an enemy you couldn't see. Doctors could only diagnose it after the symptoms showed up, by which point a huge number of critical brain cells were already gone for good. It was like trying to put out a fire after a third of the house has already burned down. The biggest problem was that there was no biological test for Parkinson's in living people. The only way to be 100% sure was to find clumps of a rogue protein called alpha-synuclein in the brain during an autopsy. This is where the story turns from personal struggle to historic scientific triumph. In April 2023, the Michael J. Fox Foundation announced a discovery that's being called the single most important breakthrough in Parkinson's research in over 60 years. Researchers from their PPMI study had validated a biomarker for Parkinson's. They had developed a tool that could biologically confirm the disease by detecting that rogue protein, alpha-synuclein, in living people with stunning accuracy. The tool is called the alpha-synuclein seeding amplification assay, or ASYN-SAA. Here's why it's a total game changer. The test takes a sample of spinal fluid and mixes it with healthy alpha-synuclein proteins. If there are even tiny traces of the bad, misfolded protein in the patient's fluid, they act like seeds, causing the healthy proteins to misfold and clump together. This process amplifies the signal, allowing scientists to finally see the disease's core pathology. The results from the PPMI study were incredible. The ASYN-SAA test correctly identified the Parkinson's protein in 93% of people with the disease in the study. Even more amazing, the test could also detect the protein in people who were at high risk but hadn't developed any symptoms yet. This breakthrough is redefining Parkinson's. For the very first time, science can move from a diagnosis based on symptoms to a biological confirmation of the disease. It's like being able to detect the plaques of Alzheimer's years before memory loss begins. The implications are massive. First, it promises a future of early and accurate diagnosis, maybe one day from a simple blood test. Second, and this is the big one, it completely transforms the search for a cure. For years, it was hard to even know if the right patients were in a drug trial. Now, with this tool, scientists can be sure. They can finally test if a new drug is actually doing its job, clearing out the bad protein. It makes clinical trials faster, cheaper, and much more likely to succeed. It opens the door to a future where we could test therapies on at-risk people, potentially to slow, stop, or even prevent the disease before it ever starts. This isn't a cure. Michael J. Fox has been very clear about that. But as he put it, it's a massive spotlight on where the research needs to go. It is the tool the entire field has been waiting for, a direct result of the foundation he built. After decades of fighting in the dark, science finally found a light switch. The story of Michael J. Fox is full of painful ironies. A man famous for his physical comedy was hit with a disease that tried to steal his control. An icon of boundless energy was forced into a daily battle with exhaustion, but the greatest irony is also the most beautiful one. The diagnosis that threatened to end his story instead gave him his life's most important role. He went from playing heroes on screen to being one in real life. His journey shows that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you get back up. He has faced his illness with brutal honesty and an incredible sense of humor, once calling Parkinson's the gift that keeps on taking. He's shown the world that a life with chronic illness can still be a life of joy, purpose, and laughter. In a recent moving speech, he looked back on his fight and the community that joined him, saying, "We threw a $2 billion bag around that little monster on the stairs. The alpha-synuclein biomarker breakthrough isn't just a scientific headline. It's a monument to hope. It's the result of a promise Michael J. Fox made more than 20 years ago. For the millions living with Parkinson's, this discovery is a new dawn. It promises a future where a diagnosis isn't the beginning of the end, but the beginning of a real, proactive fight. Michael's battle isn't over. The disease is progressive, and each day brings new challenges. But his spirit is unbreakable. His story isn't just about one man's fight with the disease anymore. It's a universal story about resilience, community, and the incredible things that happen when one person refuses to give up and dares to fight for the world as it should be. If you've been moved by this story, consider learning more. Visit the Michael J. Fox Foundation's website to see how you can be part of the progress. Share this story to help raise awareness. Every person who understands this fight brings us one step